In April 2024, Long Island was hit by a wave of crime from a completely new kind of criminal.
Suffolk police say they stole used cooking oil from 14 different businesses.
Wait, stop. Stealing used cooking oil as in, like, from your french fries? Is this even trash though? Isn't this like in the public domain? Is it even stealing? Well, it isn't an isolated incident. Private investigator told News 12 that in the span of 10 months between 2022 and 2023, about 5,000 restaurants had their cooking oil stolen. Stolen? Well, believe it or not, used cooking oil is worth money, and not trash or recycling money, but investor money. Right now, behind the scenes, there's an entire supply chain dedicated to taking this gross fast food oil and turning it into fuel to power everything from trucks to planes. UCO, and yes, there really is an acronym for it, trades like a commodity. There is a futures market even. At the end of 2024 in the US, used cooking oil was trading at roughly the same price per ton as crude oil. But in Europe, it shot up to nearly twice the price of crude. So how did we even get from gross fried chicken oil to $1 billion industry? And is this ever going to actually take over at the gas pump? The answer is a mix of business ingenuity, some government interference, and a little bit of lawlessness. To understand this fried chicken conundrum, we need to talk about energy first. The reality is that the energy that powers most of our cars and our planes comes from crude oil. Now, of course, we can't just pump crude oil straight from the ground into our cars. There's a whole refining process that's actually a pretty well-oiled machine, an industry, a supply chain that's existed for many years that takes it from here to here. Crude oil starts as a sludgy soup of chemicals. It's extracted from underground pockets to end up in an oil refinery, where it's distilled and processed into something useful. In other words, refined. Among the many things that you can make out of crude oil during this refining process are diesel and gasoline, which are then transported to gas stations, airport fuel storage facilities to be pumped into your cars and your planes. Now, I'm gonna focus on diesel today, and while most of Americans view diesel as that pump at the gas station that you have to avoid at all costs because it could ruin your car engine, diesel is commonly used for trucks, tractors, locomotives, and military vehicles. It's the most used oil product around the world. So this supply chain has existed for a really, really long time, and all the big companies that run it have it down to a science.
I drive a Prius, so...
And that's a nice little gesture. My car runs on reclaimed cooking oil. I have some literature if you want it.
Now, we knew that we could make biodiesel since the early 1900s, but crude oil was cheap, it was widely available, and outside of scientists, we hadn't really started noticing climate change yet. So nobody really cared much about getting oil out of the ground. So if you were to buy some fresh cooking soybean oil, which goes for around $4 per gallon wholesale, and go through the entire refining process, you'd end up paying about $4.70 to $5.50 to refine a gallon of biodiesel. That's based on this table from the Energy Policy Research Foundation, and that's before any distribution costs, the cut for the gas station, etc. The price for a gallon of crude oil-based diesel at the pump, $3.50. So when you compare these two, it's kind of hard to make a case for a wide adoption of biodiesel. And that's where these come back in, even though they're kind of cold now. But the point is, used cooking oil isn't bought new. It's trash. If these refiners can get these raw materials for free, then this math could actually work. And it was this dude, Martin Mittelbach from the University of Graz, who first started experimenting with using waste oils to make biodiesel, somewhere around 1983. Now, Martin's idea worked. By 1987, the first pilot biodiesel plant opened in Austria, thanks in part to the oil crisis and how expensive crude oil was at the time. And then by 91, the idea had made it to the US. Converting cooking oil into biodiesel leveraged all of these existing supply chains, and it evolved them. Restaurants now dump their fry oil, which again is, or at least was, trash to them, and it gets picked up by a collector. Some companies even sell fresh oil, or new oil, and then come back to collect the used oil. Another company cleans it up. It separates the French fries and the fried chicken leftovers, and it outputs oil that's ready for refining. And then the refiner is the last step. They take the oil and they run it through a similar process to crude oil, but with some additional different chemistry, and voila, you've got yourself some biodiesel. Now, biodiesel is an unusual, often overlooked output of food. So what if I told you that the next big business idea might be lurking in your pantry? Most early stage food and CPG, consumer packaged goods founders, chase trendy or crowded categories. Sometimes boring foods can build big businesses. The Hustle team has been working on an incredible guide on how to spot and price and scale pantry products with real staying power. It includes case studies on 5 pantry products that made millions of dollars, what they all got right, how to find the next one, with a great set of frameworks and filters to spot the next winner in your pantry. You can grab it from the link in the description or this QR code. So with free raw materials, you can really reduce that initial cost, and this could actually work. But that supply chain isn't free, because oil still needs to be picked up, it needs to be cleaned, it needs to be brought to where it can be useful, and there are big costs there. And then restaurants quickly figured out that, well, this oil isn't trash anymore. Instead of paying to get it removed, now they can charge money for it. As of Q2 2025, refiners were paying between $2.60 and $3.60 per gallon of used cooking oil. Now, there isn't so much data about this in the US because oftentimes the company that sells the fresh cooking oil is the same company that picks it up. And in the end, this ends up working kind of like a rebate, which is 15 to 50 cents per gallon, rather than a direct payment. However, that still puts it at $4.20 to $4.80 per gallon of biodiesel after all the refining costs. And if we're trying to make UCO biodiesel a real, viable alternative for regular diesel, this price has to be lower. And there's one more way that we can use to make this math work. Enter the government. There are a lot of subsidies and rules that have made UCO a really hot commodity, because there are a lot of benefits to using used cooking oil. I'm gonna get to those in a sec. For example, the Renewable Fuel Standard, established in 2005, requires each refiner or importer of gasoline and diesel to buy about 3.35 billion gallons of renewable fuel out of their total supply in the form of biodiesel, or otherwise face fine. Now, this drives up the prices of used cooking oil because the supply is not there yet, and yet the quotas are bound to continue growing. Another rule is the SAF, or the Sustainable Aviation Fuel Tax Credit, where airlines, or the suppliers of airlines, earn about $1.25 per gallon when the jet fuel is made from super low carbon raw materials like waste oil. And there are actually plenty of others, not just in the US. Europe actually started subsidizing even before the US in the early 2000s. So why give rebates to these companies that sell or pump tons of fuel? Now, there are real benefits to using used cooking oil instead of crude oil, and the most obvious of those is where the carbon comes from. Because burning fuel is bad for the environment, not just because we're putting CO2 in the atmosphere, but because that CO2 wasn't in our biosphere to begin with. We actually dug that CO2 out of the ground, we burned it in our engines, and we put it in our atmosphere. But it wasn't here. For decades, we've been trying to figure out ways to make biofuels, biodiesel, because what happens there is that plants are taking CO2 out of the atmosphere, they're turning that into oils. We're burning it in our engines again, yes, but we're not adding any new CO2 to our biosphere. We're just using the one that was already here. Now, even with all this complicated supply chain, which in the end uses fuel or diesel to operate, a gallon of 100% pure used cooking oil biodiesel still comes out up to 86% lower in greenhouse gas emissions compared to a gallon of crude oil diesel, according to one estimate. That's 20 pounds of CO2 that are avoided per gallon of diesel. Now, through an entirely different process I'm not gonna get into today, you can also convert used cooking oil into sustainable aviation fuel. About 1 million tons of SAF were used by planes in 2024, according to the IATA, though that only makes up about 0.35% of all the aviation fuel that got used. Not to mention just reusing the oil so it doesn't end up in the sewer. Like, it's cutting down emissions of other particles that are often mixed in crude oil. There are no rigs, there are no spills in the ocean. The government's logic for all these subsidies is bridging the gap in the cost of biodiesel so that these supply chains get built to get the economics right. And there is a lot of room to grow. Out of 224 metric tons of vegetable oils that are produced every year, only about 14 metric tons are collected back, and only about 11 are becoming biodiesel. Through all of these incentive policies I mentioned earlier, governments have essentially created an industry that didn't exist, and it's currently worth $7.4 billion, and it's on track to become a $12 billion industry by 2032. But creating industries also has some side consequences, because between $45 and $75 million of used cooking oil gets stolen each year. And that's what drew me to this story in the first place, this creation of an oil boom type industry that has created this black market as well. And this isn't petty thieves swimming in the dumpster.
I'm at the opera.
You need some sophistication to steal used cooking oil. That means a truck that disguises the tank, that has a pump that can extract hundreds of gallons in minutes. Sumit Majumdar, who's the founder of Buffalo Biodiesel, one of the collectors in this supply chain, said that in 2024 alone, 4,000 of his containers were drained, in many cases more than once, resulting in a collective loss of product potentially worth $20 million. 2025 is even worse, pointing at a 27% increase in theft. There is a real black market for liquid gold. Wait, what? Now, brokers in this alternative supply chain, they buy this stolen oil, they wash it, i.e. they mix it with legit purchased UCO, and then they sell it to the refinery. According to Bio-Based Diesel Daily, a person could make about $1,500 a night stealing oil, about $400,000 a year with a single van. But again, these are not individuals. Oftentimes they just belong to much larger criminal organizations. Could we call them like the fried chicken mafia?
Are you in the mafia?
I'm in a waste management business. Everybody immediately assumes you're mobbed up.
But on the other side of the coin, this soon-to-be $13 billion industry opens up some incredible opportunities for entrepreneurs. As more people discover the potential of cooking oil rebates, last-mile connection is gonna be an ever-growing necessity, even more so in developing markets where these supply chains don't even exist yet. There have been at least 100 arrests all over the US, including a high-profile 2019 case that indicted 21 suspects as part of a cooking oil ring mafia that stole over $4 million. I'm sure we can even find ways to include not just restaurant chains with large tanks, but homes where you can drop or recycle that deep-fried turkey fat. Even tech is getting into this with radar sensors to help detect potential theft, live dashboards, and an industry called smart waste. A true case of one man's trash is another man's treasure. Speaking of treasures, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to watch my last episode on Buc-ee's and why America is so obsessed with a gas station. Also, don't forget to download the Hustle's case study on pantry products that made millions of dollars. I'll catch you on the next one.